Good morning. My name is Derek Melber, and I want to welcome you to this webinar. And today I have a very intriguing topic that I want to talk about, which is the concept of compliancy and regulations versus overall security of your Windows environment. Of course, this webinar is being sponsored by Manage Engine, and I just want to thank them for the opportunity to allow me to come to you and provide you with some great information with regard to kind of the difference between my views of compliance and security. For those of you that aren't familiar with me, my name is Derek Melber. I am an independent contractor. I am a group policy MVP. I used to be an Active Directory MVP. And those of you that aren't familiar with the MVP program, basically it's evangelists, people like myself that educate, consult, train, and just really talk about Microsoft to the public, to corporations, to administrators, to help them understand the new technologies, how to utilize the existing technologies. And I've been doing this for quite a bit of time. I think I've been an MVP now for 12 years, so one of the longer-running MVPs. And it's just a pleasure of mine to be able to provide information to administrators to help them do their job better. If you want to get in touch with me, if you have any questions, after this particular webinar or in general about Active Directory, group policy, or security, there is my email address. There are some websites. I do have quite a bit of information shared out on the auditingwindowsexpert.com site. I have been writing articles for, over 15 years online, and so what I did is I created a centralized portal so that auditors and security professionals could go out and get information about Windows in a very hands-on approach in these articles. I have written about 15 books over the last 15 years. The latest one here is on your screen, which is the Group Policy Resource Kit. This is by Microsoft Press, and it is the latest and greatest from Microsoft on group policy. And it does include all of the new group policy preferences that Microsoft released just a couple of years ago. So the book is pretty relevant, pretty on track with what you need to administer group policy in an Active Directory environment. I also do some other things with regard to contracting, speaking, and whatnot. And many of you may have heard me speak on different webinars or maybe at TechEd or some of the other major conferences that are available both by Microsoft and other companies. So that's just a little bit of background on me. But really, let's jump into the material and let's talk about, really the topic of today, which is compliancy versus security. And first of all, I just want to, kind of mention the compliancy and regulations that most of us are under. It's pretty obvious. But then I want to talk about some of the shortcomings of compliancy and regulations. And some of these are going to be obvious to you, and some of them may not be obvious to you. But the whole idea is I want you to really get an idea from my perspective where compliance regulations fall short, and then I want to come in behind that and talk about really computer security as well as identity access management security. Both of these are critical, and I feel that some of the compliancy and the regulations fall short in talking about these, and I really want to stress why these are so important. And then I always like to come in and talk about what Microsoft provides kind of out of the box with regard to filling these gaps. How does Microsoft fit the need for the overall security that we need, whether it be the security, whether it be compliance, and how does Microsoft give us solutions for this? And where Microsoft kind of falls short, doesn't give us solutions, where can we come in with other products and fill those gaps? And not only in a partial way, but hopefully in a complete way. I like to provide complete solutions instead of partial solutions because I know that administrators really have limited time, limited access. So what we want is we want solutions that fit many different things, not just one point of a solution. So when we talk about compliance and regulations, most organizations fall under something. And my experience has shown that the common, well-known, and compliance regulations that most people fit into are Sarbanes-Oxley, for financials, because we all have financials that we have to deal with. Medical compliance, so this would be HIPAA, and of course, HIPAA was updated just a couple of years ago, and now that's called the HITECH Act. And so if you deal with any medical information, you're going to have to deal with some of these compliance regulations with HIPAA and HITECH. And then, of course, if you deal with credit cards, you have PCI. As I stated, this is nothing revolutionary here. I just wanted to kind of talk about the main regulations that I'm going to, I guess, pick on. And I do this quite often with regard to overall security of Windows networks. I do a tremendous amount of work with both security professionals and auditors, both internal and external auditors. And what I find is the compliance regulations, at least the controls that auditors are going after, they don't miss the mark, but they're not enough. So really what I want to talk about is with regard to the well-known compliance regulations, and even those that aren't well-known, where do those lie in the overall picture of a corporation and how we can make sure that we are dealing with what we need to deal with to make sure that things are secure? Well, if we look at just the compliance regulations in general, kind of what are those shortcomings? If we just blanket them and say, okay, we have compliancy, we have regulations, what is the average shortcoming of them? Well, the very first thing that I have trouble with is the primary goal of most of these is not security of computers. It really misses the mark, and I understand why some of these compliancies and regulations are out there, but the overall goal for me is security. And if you deal with security, then the compliancy needs are going to be met. But the primary goal of most of these regulations is to protect data. Now, that may seem the same as security of computers, but it's not, because the security of computers is far greater than just the protection of data. The protection of data is one piece of security. But what we need is we need to go beyond what the compliancy is saying. We need to go beyond what just is written down for these compliancies. And we need to make sure that security issues for computers are incorporated in those. And not just look at one piece, one pillar of security, but really the overall picture. Now, if we continue on and talk about more shortcomings, when they do include security, which again, protection of data is security, it's just too shallow. We're not going deep enough. We not only need to address the access to the data, but we also need to address all of the different ways to access the network, ways that we can do denial of service attacks, ways that we can break into accounts and then the accounts gain access to the data. There's so many other ways that we need to deal with data that we can't just leave it to one particular area. And again, what I have found is that many of the regulations don't go deep enough. And it's not just one. I'm not going to just pick on PCI. I'm not going to pick on SOX. I'm not going to pick on HIPAA. I'm going to pick on all of them and say that all of them are pretty shallow in how far they go. And not only are they shallow, they're not very broad. So not only are we not getting deep enough with access to data, and with deep enough, I'll go back to that and say it's not only, okay, who can access and what did they do, we need to go deeper. We need to go into the access control list and make sure that we are ensuring that the correct groups are listed and who has management of those groups is listed and when those groups change are listed. And we need to set up auditing on those particular files and folders to make sure we know who touches them in a particular way. We need to make sure that the server they're accessing is protected. We need to make sure that user rights, the local administrators group. I mean, it's not just one piece. It really blossoms very quickly. And that depth and then the breadth of that security needs to be there. And most compliance regulations, the breadth is just not there. We need to look at the security of the overall network. We need to look at user access. We need to look at the attack surface, where the vulnerabilities exist. We need to make sure that the servers are patched. We need to make sure that the configurations of the server are correct for LAN manager. Who's a local administrator? I mean, all of these things are so important when it comes to security of your overall network, and really compliance is dealing with something that is just a pillar. So the security of the network infrastructure also needs to be incorporated. I deal a lot with security administrators, network administrators, Active Directory administrators, and I really try to drive home to them that all areas of the network are very important. It used to be years ago that we were concerned about the attackers from the outside coming in. But over the last 5, 6, 7, maybe even 8 years, our primary threat is no longer the outsider, it's the insider. And I believe personally, from my experience of auditing and helping organizations set up security, that security administrators and network administrators really aren't looking at that. They're not looking at the right information. Yes, we are looking at some of it, but we're not being standardized, and we're not making sure that things are consistent across our networks. We're not making sure that Active Directory procedures are consistent. The provisioning, deprovisioning, reprovisioning of users. This has to be something that is very tight. Our mandates and our procedures have to be very tight, and it really fits into this breadth of security that compliance and regulations don't meet. And really it kind of is a thorn in my side when I go into an organization. That organization is so focused on the SOX servers because they're doing a SOX compliance regulation. And I really have a problem with that because there are other servers on the network. We have all the domain controllers. We have the servers that communicate with the SOX servers. We have desktops that communicate with the SOX servers. And they don't look at these. The SOX audits only target SOX servers, which the SOX servers are servers which contain financial information. But again, that's where the breadth isn't enough. We need to go beyond that. We need to go into those areas that also touch those compliance servers. Again, whether it's PCI or HIPAA, it really doesn't matter to me because networks are so complex and the entry points are so diverse, we need to look at all of them. Well, what are some other shortcomings? Well, the details are just too generic. I mean, not only the overview of the compliancies are not enough, just what is stated in these are just too generic. The wording doesn't get specific enough to really allow us to interpret the true desires of what the compliancy is saying. For example, I pulled something out of HIPAA, and it says, implement hardware, software, and other procedural mechanisms that record and examine activity and information systems that contain or use electronic protected health information. Holy moly, right? I mean, if we really read this to what it states, it says anything that could possibly touch a computer that contains electronic PHI information needs to be tracked. We need to record the activity. Well, that's, of course, not the way that it's interpreted. It's interpreted usually in a much smaller way. But the point of this wording is, you know what? If anything is touching the protected health information, we need to know about it. We need to know it. We need to know it because there are so many places to attack. There are so many areas where we're concerned about this. And not only are the compliancy wordings too generic, they're also too vague. I mean, of course, the first one is well, what do you exactly mean? Well, the second one is we don't go deep enough. We really don't get the true intention of what's being stated. Here's another example. It says, implement policies and procedures to prevent, detect, contain, and correct security violations. Holy moly. That is intense. That means that if anything related to security, which of course everything in computers is related to security, we need to make sure that we prevent, detect, and contain them. And then, of course, when something goes wrong, correct it. Well, that means everything. Well, again, this is just too vague. We deal with this, and I've gone into many organizations and been in after a SOX audit, where I've gone in and looked at the SOX report. Some SOX reports are a page long, others are 25 pages long, and it all depends on how someone interprets these regulations. And I think that is a downfall because we're not getting the true meaning. We're not getting the true intention of what we need. So where should we be focusing? Well, the way that I approach this is we need to focus primarily on security. And if we focus on security, compliance regulations will be a part of that. So when we talk about security, we're going to have two different pillars here, okay, that umbrella security of a Windows environment. First is security of computers. We need to make sure that the computers are secured. Well, what does that mean? Well, first of all, we need to incorporate all the different Windows computers that are on our network. Not only the SOC servers, not only the servers that contain ePHI information, but we need to look at servers that maybe are for VPNs, servers that maybe allow users to come in through DNS lookups, that maybe the DNS isn't configured properly and someone is getting additional information. We definitely need to look at desktops. We absolutely have to look at laptops. I see so many organizations that are allowing their users to take private information out on the road with them, and then I look at their laptops and they're completely insecure. They're not secure. So it's not just our servers. We need to look at the gamut of the Windows systems. Anything that could possibly give us access to the network, anything that could store data, we need to make sure that these machines are protected. And we need to make sure that security goes beyond the immediate server containing the data, which again goes back to the first point, which is we need to look at all Windows computers. There are so many ways to get into a network. There are so many ways to hack a user account. There are so many ways for an internal user to gather information and then attack the network. We need to look at all these different ways that an attacker wants to attack the network. And again, an attack doesn't have to be someone getting a hold of the administrator password. It could be a denial of service attack. If your servers aren't functioning, if no one can log on, that is a very good attack. So what we need to make sure is we need to make sure that we include enough of the environment to make the audit, to make the security configurations valid. If we're not containing enough, then we're not going far enough beyond the servers that contain the data. What else incorporates security of computers? Well, we need to have comprehensive security settings. Well, what does that mean? Well, we need to make sure that we take care of vulnerabilities. We need to make sure that we take care of vulnerabilities that have known exploits. We need to make sure that LAN manager, anonymous, user rights, local administrator privileges, all these different areas which are weaknesses in security are made correct, made secure. And any controls that we know have high risk, we need to track those. If someone is added to the domain admins or the enterprise admins group, we better have an alert telling us that that happened. So we need to have these comprehensive security settings, and it goes beyond just group membership. It goes beyond just the ACL. I just listed some of those for you, but when I go in, I have about a 45-point control check for auditors when we go in and look at Windows systems. So it's not just a couple of things, and I look at many of the Sarbanes-Oxley audits, and it's like 5 different points, and I'm like, that's just not enough. I'm looking at 45. That's almost 10 times the number of controls. We also need to make sure that security and controls alternate attack surfaces. We need to make sure that we go beyond. We need to think out of the box, because that's what attackers do. We need to make sure that we think out of the box and make sure that we are not allowing alternate attack entries to be valid. Group membership, easy entry points like VPNs, wireless access. We need to make sure that weak policies and procedures are overcome. We don't allow those. We need to have very strict things. I was at a company here just a couple of weeks ago doing some consulting. I live in Phoenix, Arizona, and the company was kind of small, less than 20 users, and the owner of the company doesn't like passwords, so no one in the company is required to have a password on their computer. Of course, I can't force them to do it, but we should force them to do it. Without a password, we have no security. Last year I did some consulting for a hospital, and they had a 2-character password. I just don't understand this. We need to make sure that these attack locations are secured. And we need to make sure that we don't allow these types of behaviors. These types of behaviors should not be allowed, and they help with the overall security of our computers. With the policies and procedures, we need to have them in place. One of the very first things I ask when I go into an organization is, give me the build procedures for your servers. If they don't exist, then what am I going to check against? I need to know what the company sees as security. If they don't have a build procedure for a server, then what are we looking at? Give me the procedures for putting a new user in the environment. When a new user joins the environment, what's the process? Give me the paperwork. Give me the documentation. Give me the procedures of how you give them the password. We need the workflow of changes to groups, changes to data access, changes to network access. Really, auditing should be very easy. Auditing should be nothing more than going to the archive of the documentation of changes and verifying that that's exactly what the server says. Yes, things happen. I'm an administrator. Let's be real. Things happen on a network. Things need to get done. But we need to make sure that these things are done within certain guidelines. And if they're not, the security of our servers are going to be vastly out of skew. They're going to drift from what we wanted it to be. We need to have change management in controls in place, right? We need to know who made the change, when they made the change, what they changed, what the new setting is, what the old setting is. All that information has to be put in place. Without this, we're out kind of on a raft, right? I was watching Gilligan's Island yesterday, and Gilligan and Skipper were out on a raft, and they were just floating out there in the middle of nowhere. If you don't have change management, you're in the middle of nowhere. You don't know what's happening around you. You also need to have triggers. You need to have alerts in place for key controls. You need to archive these. You need to know what has changed over time, because some things may have changed 2 or 3 iterations ago, and right now someone exploited them. So we need to be able to go back in time to know who made that change. Why did you make that change? Was it malicious? Was it an error? Why did that change occur? And we need those details. Without the details, we're just looking at, blah information. We need the details to tell us what is happening in our networks and who is making these errant or malicious changes. We need to get that type of information. Now, the second pillar, beyond security of our computers, is we need to make sure that our identity access management is secure. The life cycle of users and how they access data has to be put in place. I cannot stress this enough. This is the foundation of security, of access in your organization. If you do not have some mechanism to control this, your organization is out of control with regard to access management. Now, what does this kind of chart mean? Well, what the chart is saying that we need to be able to provision users correctly. We need policies and procedures and hopefully have this automated so that when users come into the environment, they give the correct access immediately. We need to make sure that it covers everything too. Now, what we're going to talk about is the Microsoft solutions. We're going to see that Microsoft falls short with this. Well, there are tools out there that help you provision users so that they're correct, so that they have access to the data correctly. We need to make sure that all activities that relate to access management are tracked in some way. We need to make sure that these procedures occur correctly. And when a change occurs, so a user moves from one department to another, that re-provisioning of the user is correct. We don't want a user left in a group, for example. We want to make sure that that is automated if possible. Users and humans are very common at making simple mistakes. Computers aren't. They don't make simple mistakes. When you tell it to do something, it's always going to remember what you told it to do. And then we need to make sure that when a user leaves the organization, they're taken out of the world. They're taken out of what they should have access to. That way, if someone tries to hack in as them, or if someone can be able to get back into the network, they can't gain access to the data. So this life cycle of a user, of groups, and access to data is kept in place. And as much of this can be audited, can be possible, is key. All right? And again, I cannot stress enough, this is the very important pillar of security of your Windows environment. So when possible, your access management security should be automated. I just kind of went over these things. At the forefront, we need templates. We need to set something up, review it, and then now whenever a new user is created, a template is created, and boom, all of a sudden all of their access is put in place. High-risk data needs to be protected. So we need to make sure that we have central controls over these things. We need to make sure that these things are monitored. Any changes in Active Directory need to be audited, and key alerts need to be set up. Inappropriate access should be alerted. Provisioning, reprovisioning, deprovisioning of users needs to be automated and meet the standards of the company. That way we know that when a new user joins the organization, it has the correct settings. This is so integral to the security of your organization. And again, most compliancy regulations don't go this deep. They don't go this broad. And we need to be at this place in order to meet our requirements. So what does Microsoft provide to meet our security needs? Well, when it comes to comprehensive security settings, Microsoft provides us with group policy. And group policy is pretty robust. I'm going to be honest here. When it comes to group policy, we have over 5,500 settings, not to mention the custom settings. Wow. Okay? Now, unfortunately, little is provided in the operating system to guide you what you should set up. Microsoft has some guidelines, but they're just guidelines, and it's not comprehensive of everything. So what you have is you go out and buy Active Directory, you buy your server, you install it, and then it's left up to you to go in and make the settings that you need to make. So you're kind of left out in the dark here, okay? We need to include controls, or what does Microsoft provide to protect against alternate attack surfaces? Well, Active Directory is a beast. I'm going to be honest. Active Directory is big. It gets bigger every iteration. So we have a tool to help with this, but nowhere does it tell us where we need to go to set up security. If I were to ask you, and I wish I could do a poll, but if I were to ask you, where do I go to eliminate the use of LAN manager in every possible permutation, would you guys know where to go to do that? If I were to point you to group policy, would you know which settings in group policy to set up to eliminate LAN manager? What about anonymous? What about user rights? How do I set up user rights on a SOC server? What user rights am I concerned about? These are things that are complex, and it's not just a simple, go here and configure it. It's a shotgun approach. I mean, the password policy alone is extremely complex. I was just in Columbia, Missouri last week helping schools understand the password policy. It's very complex, and to understand where to go and make sure you know what's set up, it's not an easy task. So Microsoft provides some guidelines here, but it's not enough to go in and really set it up properly. Well, what about policies and procedures? Well, notice here at the end of most of the sentences, non-existent, non-existent, non-existent. Okay? Now, the documentation of changes that occur, they don't occur automatically. You have to set up auditing for that, and then you have to go into the log, and the log is done per server. It's not centralized. You can kind of see where I'm going here. So Microsoft does not provide any help for policies and procedures. Nothing. Okay? What about change management of controls? When something changes, I need to be triggered. Well, notice here the history of security groups and their members. It is possible, but it's hard to set up and analyze because you have to know exactly where to go and what you're looking for. With key data, right? Yep, I can set up auditing on files and folders, but I got to know where to go. I need to know exactly which buttons to hit. So it's not easy to set up and very hard to analyze. Triggers, non-existent. They don't exist. Archiving of changes does not exist. Okay, it just doesn't work that way. Now, of course, I could keep the logs, and that could be my archive, but now I have to go through these huge logs to try to find out when things changed. And the details, wow. If you're going to want to get details from Microsoft on change management, you have to know exactly where to go and what to set up. Some of the advanced auditing helps with this, but again, it doesn't centralize it, so we're kind of stuck behind the 8 ball. How do we get the information that we need because it's not obvious using the Microsoft tools? Well, what about the access management security? What does Microsoft provide here? Well, again, I was stressing templates. I was stressing that IAM is the keystone to your security. Well, templates are not available. You can create a user and copy the user, but it's only for kind of the basic information that's copied over from one user to another one, right? What about access to data and auditing of that? Well, it's limited in scope. As we've mentioned before, Microsoft doesn't provide that type of control at that level, and it's certainly not centralized. You're going to have to go to every single key point of data, and you are going to have to set up and control the data at that point. Now, Active Directory auditing is available, and actually, this is something that I've spent a little bit of time with to make sure that you can get the right information. But I have to spend literally a couple of hours just teaching administrators how to set this up, and then it's up to them to be able to analyze the information. So it's extremely complex, and because of the complexity, it's not very efficient. What about data access auditing? Yep, it's available. File and folder auditing is available, but again, very complex. Reprovisioning of users is not possible out of the box. User deprovisioning, not possible out of the box. It's not like Microsoft provided these controls, a life cycle of a user. They gave you a raw tool and said, go for it. So we don't have these things, which if you look at a normal environment, this is why we have issues with security. The compliancy regulations aren't getting us to the right place. We have key cornerstone concepts of security which aren't being controlled by the operating system. That's why when I go into an organization, I have a lot of work to do because the security is not in place. Someone has to put mechanisms in place using scripts and other mechanisms to do it if they're going to try to use Microsoft technologies. And that's just not very easy to do. So what does Manage Engine do for these? Well, if we look at comprehensive security settings, well, all aspects of the Active Directory can be centrally managed and audited. So now when I'm talking about the use of group policy, the use of Active Directory, putting things in place, I can control those centrally using a centralized tool. The Active Directory Manager gives you access to the Active Directory objects and the group policy objects so you can centrally administer those. You don't have to go into 3 or 4 different tools. You go to one. What about alternate attack services? Well, all aspects of Active Directory are centrally managed and audited. Key data can be managed and audited. So now what we're doing is now we're looking at things beyond what compliancy says. We're looking beyond just the data, and we're saying, all right, we're going to go into all these different aspects, controlled through group policy, controlled through Active Directory, and we're going to give you a centralized tool to deal with those. And the Active Directory Manager gives you all of this in one centralized tool. Well, what about policies and procedures? Well, this is one of the very first things I ask for when I go in and do an audit. Give me your policies and procedures. Well, the policies and procedures for users, for group management, for group membership can be put in place through templates. And so now the provisioning of users, groups, and computers is put in place to someone just has to click a button and it's done. Now it's meeting all of those policies and procedures immediately instead of having to go through a punch list. You put the punch list of your policies and procedures into a template and now you're done. So now the documentation of users, groups, computers, the changes to your servers and domain controllers is done within a tool. So now all of that is in place. You have workflow so that you can make sure that changes to anything has to meet certain requirements. Again, we do not want people that can load the gun to pull the trigger normally. We want a workflow in place. Auditors love this. Security requires this. Change management. Wow, Active Directory Auditor is just phenomenal for Manage Engine. Change history of key security groups, of every security group if you want them. Whether or not the group is created, modified, or deleted, all of that is tracked. Any Active Directory object is tracked, and you can look at the archive. You can set up data controls. So now you're looking at servers. I want to look at this server. I want to look at this folder, these files on that server to make sure I know when anyone is changing that data. You know you want to do this. You try to do it with PCI, HIPAA, and SOX compliancy, but the regulations aren't forcing it, so now you're doing other things. Well, guess what? Manage Engine has a solution for you. So all you do is you go in, set it up, and it's automatically doing that. If you have data that is so important that you need to set up triggers and alerts, you can do that as well. I mean, if you have data that can maybe you're a hospital, and you have data that if something changes with some records, you need to know immediately. Well, you can set that up in Manage Engine. You can set it up to where now I know that this data has changed, and I'm going to get an email on that. And again, I mentioned earlier, we need an archive. We need to know historically what has changed with that data, and we need the details. Well, the audit tool from Manage Engine, Active Directory Auditor, does all of this in one place. And it's so easy to set up. It's kind of ridiculous how easy it is to set up. Okay? Well, what about some of your security needs for your procedures and automation? Well, there are templates. There are templates for users. There are templates for groups. There are templates for computers. Now, notice here in my screenshot, one of the awesome things about the Manage Engine solutions is they don't deal with one-offs. They deal with bulk. If we have, let's say we're working for a school district and we have a brand new set of students coming in. You give me the user list, you give me their student ID, boom, I'm going to suck those into Active Directory and I'm going to provision them correctly based on the template that I'm utilizing. That's the power that we have with these tools. So now I'm meeting my procedures and I'm doing it in a very efficient manner. I mean, when I showed these tools last week to some of the schools in the state of Missouri, they were astounded that these tools exist. These tools can change the way that they administer. It's going to free up so much time. Now they're going to be able to do other things to make sure that their networks are secure. Well, what about the procedures with the high-risk data? Well, when we deal with high-risk data, we're able to centrally, through the Manage Engine console, go in and set up permissions for the different control data that is high risk. And not only can we configure them, we can also audit them. So on the other side, we can use Auditor to track all the different aspects that we need to track. Well, when it comes to account management, right? I mean, I need to know when things change. And I tried to get the biggest screenshot I could without taking up the whole slide. But let me tell you, the ability for Manage Engine to track things, it's astounding. I'm going to be honest. I mean, I've been dealing with Active Directory and group policy a long time. And when I saw this tool, I was doing backflips. And if you saw that I'm 6'6" and I can't do a backflip, that's pretty impressive. Okay? I mean, we have reports. We have the ability to track account management. Notice this. All AD changes, user changes, group changes, computer changes. It's all here. You do not have to set up the reports. You don't really have to set up anything. The tool sets up all the auditing, and all you do is look at the reports. That's the power of Manage Engine. Everything is centralized, and it is so easy to use. It is extremely easy to use. Well, what about inappropriate access to data? Now, this is really a sweet spot for compliancy, right? I need to know when someone touched something inappropriately. I need to know when someone tried to change data and they weren't supposed to. Well, that's where the auditor comes in for files. I can pinpoint files, and I know what they are, right? They're all the files that you say are on your SOX servers. So now what I can do is I can take your SOX servers and the files, put them into Manage Engine, the auditor, and now I can track them real time. So if I'm an auditor, I just want to get the report of the files that I'm concerned about. And it's going to tell me all of the access that I'm tracking for that particular resource. That's the power that we have with Manage Engine. Well, with regard to the provisioning and reprovisioning, I mean, this is so robust. I tried to get as much as I could, but you can set up your own rules. You have your own automation policies to create, modify, and then deprovision users. No longer are you going to have users in your environment that are stragglers, that shouldn't be there. You're going to have users that are correctly moved and then deleted when the time comes. And it's all in the same interface with Manage Engine. So, as a summary, we know that compliance and regulations have shortcomings. The biggest one is we need security. We need security of servers and access management. Identity access management is the keystone. No matter what, we need that. Every organization needs that. Well, Microsoft really doesn't give us what we need. So we really need something else. I'm not going to tell you to go to 5 different tools to get this. Why do that when I can point you to one tool? And the one tool provides the solution that we need. The one tool has everything that we need to solve the problems on our networks. And I know that all of you have these problems. I do. I've been the administrator, I've been the contractor, I've been the consultant for security and auditors, and I know you have these problems. That's why me as the MVP, I'm coming to you trying to give you these solutions. So as kind of a parting gift for you, Manage Engine gave me this link and said, send them to here and they can download the tools. They can use the tools. Please use the tools. I've dealt with many other software vendors that the tools are hard to install. Let me tell you, this one is a slam dunk. Very easy. Once you have it installed, it's extremely easy to use as well. So please, go out there and look at what these tools can provide. So that's kind of the end of my presentation, but I'm going to take a couple of questions now and hopefully fill in some gaps in the couple of minutes that we have left. The very first question that I have is, why limit the scope to only Windows computers? What a great question. The only reason I'm limiting the scope is because I'm the Windows expert, but the Manage Engine tools go beyond Windows. They're not just Windows. I'm just focusing on the Windows solutions, the Active Directory solutions, because I'm not the Unix guy. I'm not the Novell guy. I'm not the AS400 guy. But they do have solutions around that. And again, please go out to the Manage Engine and get in contact with an SE to get a demo on these products. The products are quite impressive. The follow-up to that is, shouldn't the focus be on all computers on the network regardless of OS? 100%. 100%. But again, we're dealing with, in this presentation, just Windows. So take everything that I've said and say that to any other OS and what is being controlled on your network. Very, very important. Another question that I have here. Let's see. I believe the requirement for automated provisioning of user does not provide the return on investment when implemented in all environments. Well, of course not. We can't say all environments, but I have dealt with many different verticals with regard to Active Directory. And when I saw the Manage Engine solution and the way that the templates can be dealt with and the way you can import bulk users, it's pretty impressive. And not any tool is going to provide flexibility across the board. But in my opinion, the Active Directory Manager and the Active Directory Auditor provide solutions that are going to meet 99% of all the needs on all the companies that I've seen because of the flexibility and the depth of these tools. Well, if you have any other questions, please email me or contact someone at Manage Engine, and that's the end of our presentation. Thank you so much. Have a good day.